Now, I want to talk about Nvidia because Nvidia is not making new highs. NASDAQ did make a new high this week. Nvidia did not. I continue to believe Nvidia has already peaked. We have earnings 1 week from today, and if we do go back up, the trend lines I'm watching in the weekly time frame. Now, this is a trend line. Again, I've talked about the gap here coming back and filling the gap with Nvidia. We're doing that now. This is the gap lower from the DeepSeek sell-off. And again, we had two gaps. We had the one from the DeepSeek sell-off. It dropped 17%, over 18% at the lows of the session, closed at 17% lower, a 200-period moving average. And then we went a little bit lower with the tariff gap lower, the tariff sell-off, and that formed bullish divergences like right here on the RSI. On some indicators, we saw a hollow rig candlestick and we rallied back up. Now, I've drawn in this channel before we ever reached the gap, and again, previously talked about how we were coming up to the 50, and I told you if we get above that, we can fill the gap immediately. The market got a bigger pullback. Could have taken our time doing that, and I talked about those scenarios with the 50 period being tested on Nvidia. But I told you eventually I thought it would be filled. It was filled yesterday, and again now short sellers are lurking there at that gap fill, so we could get a pullback with NASDAQ market if we see Nvidia begin to pull back. We've had this drop, and now back and filling that gap. So you have a possible channel now in play. If we turn right here. So we'll be watching the gap fill and the trend line right here that we're stalling at here on Nvidia. On the weekly chart, we are coming back to the 20-week moving average. Remember, we broke down from the trend line, but then we struggled to dip below the 20-week moving average here in the weekly time frame. And we ended up back testing the trend line, and then we had that nasty gap lower surrounding the DeepSeek sell-off. Now we're coming back up and we're filling that gap. If we pull back or just keep going, this is a trend line I'm going to be watching right here. Now that, again, could still possibly take us to new highs. I talked about high being in, but if we go back and back test the trend line yet again, look at where it's pointing. It's pointing up into that area. And again, could be that with earnings, maybe we do make new highs and we may slam into these trend lines yet again. We hit it right here and we turn down, moving slightly above the peak with the earnings previously there in November. And both of those highs were higher than the high from the June peak. Again, EO was aggressively selling stock and we saw that dip. But again, there's something to pay attention to with Nvidia. Now, again, I thought it topped. I could be wrong if we go up and slam into these resistance levels again without making a lower high and turning back down off of the trend line that we're slamming into right now. So just something to be aware of, because you've got this multiple point divergence that is likely going to end up giving us a long-term bull market on Nvidia and up causing the AI bubble to completely burst. But these divergences have given us a lot of volatility. But could we go up and test these levels again? Something to be aware of. And well, I told you I thought we had topped. I'd be wrong about that if Nvidia attempts to go back up to these levels surrounding earnings. And maybe that ends up helping the market. We'll be watching to see how it unfolds. But to break this channel, could we be in a larger backtest and backtest the breakdown yet again? We had an immediate backtest there. Do we do it again up here? But interesting how these trend lines intersect with one another. This trend line right here from these highs, that's off of a major trend line longer term with all of the data that we have in the weekly time frame. This right here is just our channel from the 2022 low right here, and this trend line right here is just from our recent peaks in 2024 and here in our more recent price action. So again, well, I told you I thought Nvidia topped at this trend line right here, and then the breaking down of the channel. Could we go back up and slam up into that level? I'm very open-minded to that, because could it be Nvidia is in a topping process and breaking down and back testing the channel yet again and slam it up into this trend line right here, the upper channel of our larger channel with all of the price data that we have on Nvidia. Could it be we're in a larger topping process and we still go make one final climax high surrounding earnings? I wouldn't rule it out. Again, I told you, thought we peaked, maybe still in a larger topping process in this area. So I always like to tell you what I think, and I told you I thought we had peaked, but again, I want to tell you I'm open-minded to a larger topping process because I could be wrong about that. Again, going back to the daily chart, again, it's hard to tell, but this peak right here that we had is just a few cents above this peak over here, just pushing above that 53 area there. That's the trend line that we're stalling at right now. So if we end up pulling back and then clearing, and these other levels, do we have, a little bull flag that's going to end up taking us to a new high, and we may pull back and build momentum. We'll see what happens as we go into earnings next week. But again, pull it out because, again, don't think we finished the blow off top on the S&P 500. Could Nvidia be part of all of that and helping out? The other weekly chart that I showed you, we turned off of this trend line. If you take the highs over here, you kind of exclude the shadows there, we slammed into it, just moved slightly, just a fraction above the November high. And then we broke it down and we're back testing. If you look at this trend line right here, just above that level, or if we go towards it here, just above it, then we could slam into this trend line right here. And again, we overthrew this trend line ever so slightly here. If you draw the line connecting those levels. Again, we turned off of that level here in January, as we saw in the other chart. But just above that level is, again, the back test of this trend line and this longer term trend line right here. So is that eventually where we're headed? We'll be watching closely. Now we're filling the gap from the DeepSeek sell-off. Again, I've talked about this being the most important trend line in the stock market. In my mind, it is, because it's broken now. That could be suggesting, again, the trend is now changing. We're going to see the bursting of the AI bubble. Again, two things I think will create the top, causing the market to begin to price in a recession. One is the bursting of the AI bubble, and the other, Nvidia could be signaling here, the other, the inflation freakout, likely usher in 20% sell-off to usher in the bear market. We'll talk about, we'll top on a black swan event. No, you don't top on black swan. That comes later. The black swan event in 2008 with the financial crisis, the market had already peaked long before it peaked in 2007. We got the black swan event in 2001 with the 9/11 attacks. We already saw the bursting of the tech bubble. It came later. The black swan comes later. That's why I say the third or fourth quarter, or maybe the first quarter of 2026. That's when you're going to see your black swan, not now. That's likely going to be a banking crisis, which I've talked about at great length and detail. Please support the channel with the link directly below. That allows me to be able to provide you this information. If you like the charts, you like the indicators, let me know that by supporting the channel. If you could take a moment to do that, I would really, really be grateful. Follow the link below to take you to a secured site, and you can donate any amount you want or make it a recurring donation. If you take a moment to partner with me and help out, I would really, really appreciate that. Thank you for your consideration for that. NASDAQ has pushed to new highs, but the rally on Nvidia is still making lower highs. It's not moving to new high. And again, I think Nvidia's peaked, but NASDAQ may peak before the S&P 500 does. Just something worth paying attention to. The linear scaling, I'm looking at the trend lines up here directly overhead. After we bounced off our 20-week moving average a couple of times there, looking at this MACD closely and the multiple point diversions. But I'm looking at this area right here, and then I'm also looking, this is our linear scaling, I'm also looking at that log scaling, which could take us a little higher on NASDAQ. Again, we are making a new high here. We broke down from this rising wedge. We bounced out the 20-week a couple of times, and now we're making a new high. So again, that can continue. Then I'm watching these trend lines here in the weekly time frame, and again, forming multiple point negative diversions under construction here, and here on the MACD as it's turning back up. So should we see the rally continue on NASDAQ, these are the levels that I'll be watching here with their linear and log scaling in the weekly time frame. Here's why we still may get a pullback right here and now. Take a look at NASDAQ. And again, we had that S&P barely getting 1 point above the previous peak. So again, confirmation of fall through. Maybe today's just confirmation of that on the S&P because it wasn't a decisive push above it. NASDAQ, same thing. We got this really this candle of indecision here, this doji looking candlestick yesterday closing above the December high. Tried to get a follow through today and we couldn't do it. We couldn't close above yesterday's high. That's that dotted red line you see right there. So no confirmation of the close from yesterday's push above the December high. You need confirmation and a follow through if we're going to keep going. So we may pull back. We may pull back towards the cloud here and towards the moving averages if we get something deeper, or just may come back to try to fill the gap right here and get something more mild. So we'll be watching to see if we do get a pullback, if we don't get confirmation and a fall through, then again, folks are going to go double top, double top, double top. And again, it's possible NASDAQ peaks before the S&P 500 does. It is making a new high. Momentum might continue after a pullback, and it may top before the S&P tops. For instance, right here, the S&P with the tariff sell-off, it moved to a new low. NASDAQ made a higher low. Sometimes they diverge at turning points. We've seen this over and over again. He peaked on December 6th. NASDAQ kept rallying until mid-December, and then it turned. NASDAQ went higher. The S&P did not. Sometimes they diverge from one another. So again, I'll be watching what happens here. But right now, we closed above the December high yesterday. There is no confirmation of today's candlestick. So again, the risk is that we turn right back down and test some moving averages, try to fill the gap, or maybe get something bigger if we challenge this low right here, or try to gravitate closer towards the trending cloud. Now, again, we bounced off with the higher low, our 50-period moving average here, and also on the S&P 500. And we have this trend line of support on the NASDAQ right here, which is the trend line that comes in just above that cloud, the trending cloud, and our 100 is still here. But again, the 50, the 20, and the 10, they're all pointing up. They're in a bullish arrangement. So again, we'll be watching. But again, do we get a pullback? And if so, mild, or is it something deeper? But again, predicted the January lows over here a week before they happened. Again, I continue to believe these lows are going to hold as we form the topping process. Now, removing some lines here, I want to continue to point out the importance of the July peak trend line with the peak right here in December, and that's where we came back up to right now. So that's an important trend line to be watching going forward. Even if we pull back, that's a trend line that we could reach. This channel also could be in place if we start trying to move aggressively towards the upper boundary of the rising wedge in that weekly time frame with our log scaling. So just some trend lines I'm watching here, along with the lower boundary trend line connecting the January low with the August low. We'll be watching to see if we get a pullback here. NASDAQ 100 was flat. It was up about 11 points, or just under 11 points. Again, we've got these little divergences that are trying to form here, so we'll see if we get some kind of pullback or not. The MACD could be still carving this out, but right now we are pretty much flat for the session. Again, a lot of choppiness in here. Now we're pushing up above that December high. Failed to get confirmation of it, so we still may see a pullback, but NASDAQ can go a lot higher. It moves with the S&P, some of the trend lines that I've been talking about there in the weekly time frame. A lot of chop and slop now as we've come back up to test the highs, moving to a new high. We'll see if we pull back or not. Get the confirmation and follow through. Did not get confirmation today of yesterday's close above that previous peak on the NASDAQ 100. Again, I continue to be bullish. The weekly signals are bullish, suggesting we're going to go up to the trend lines I've been talking about in the weekly and the daily time frame. Don't get distracted by short-term price fluctuations, even if we get another pullback. At the December high, January high right here, again, our signals warned we are going to get a pullback. S&P initially went sideways as the Dow and the Russell sold off sharply, but then the S&P had a downward break of the triangle, and we got a bigger sell-off. And I told you if that happened, if we had a downward resolution, we're going back to fill the gap, which we did from the election, the gap from the election, and bounce off 2023 trend line, which we did right here. I predicted on January 9th and 10th that we were going to bottom the following week. We did the very next day on Monday the 13th, hitting the trend line, filling the election gap. I told you we were going to get a rally ahead of the election. That's why I ahead of the inauguration day, which I believe is a continuation of the election rally. It's going to be the tax cuts, which again, now they're moving to renew the 2017 tax cuts. Is likely going to be fuel for the blow off top, be the tariffs that give us reversal and the sell off and the crash. Really a no-brainer if you think about it. I told you we get this rally, and then I told you up here we get a pullback to back test the trend line of the bull flag. Everybody was telling us we had a head and shoulders top. I told you it's a fake pattern because this was minor wave 4. We're now in minor wave 5, and we got our first wave done. And I told you over here we sold off with DeepSeek. I told you we're still going to go lower. We did. We had the tariff sell-off, Canada and Mexico there, and then concessions as I predicted would happen. And we got the rebound back up. I told you with the rising wedge over here coming back and filling the tariff gap that we would come back and test it and either get a higher low or a lower low. I told you at that time I didn't know which. It wasn't a certain, hey, we're going to get a sell-off here. Hey, we're going to get a sell-off over here. And we talked about that divergence and the bullish divergence is here. And I told you we were going to bounce, and I told you we were going down to hit that 2023. I was certain about those turns. I was certain about the pullback here. We were going to still make new lows here, but I told you we were going to get a higher low or lower low. And again, told you we had a throwback, and we ended up getting the higher low back towards the 20 or 200 period moving average. Now we've rallied back up, likely in subwave 3. I believe subwave 2 finished here, 1 over here, and we're in subwave 3. Again, we're getting a lot of chop and slop as we had finished 1, got 2, and have likely now started 3. Getting our first couple of microwaves here, and we get some more volatility here. But again, for a pullback, again, don't lose sight of the bigger picture. We are likely headed higher. And again, focus on the short-term price fluctuations. Focus on the main movement. I remain bullish. Yes, I predicted the pullback here. Yeah, I predicted this little pullback here, saying we test this low for a higher low or lower low. We got those things. We're still headed higher to complete the blow off top and likely going into the tariffs. Ended today. The S&P gets another record high. I've been predicting new all-time highs. I've been warning you about this over and over again and video after video. And again, it's not over. We are going much higher. The Dow up 71 points. The S&P up about 0.25%, up about just under 15 points there. NASDAQ pretty much flat. The Russell down about 1/3%, and the VIX down about 0.5% to close at 15.27. We still have more Fed speakers for the week here, so we'll be watching to see if they do anything to rattle the market based on the FOMC minutes being released. The FOMC minutes reflecting what I continue to tell you. The Fed is worried about inflation. Recession, we got the FOMC minutes. Market shrugged it off, rallied, closed higher. Oh, and surprise, surprise, the Fed is worried about the tariffs' impact on inflation. Who told you that? I've been warning you for months now. Trump won the election. Now Powell's worried about the tariffs. He's worried about the economy overheating. The thing I told you is happening. All leading up to an inflation freakout that's going to happen once we complete the blow-off top at higher levels. Tax cuts, the extension of the 2017 tax cuts, will likely take us higher. Continue the election rally. The tariffs, the uptick in the inflation data, and concerns now that the Fed is not going to be able to cut anymore, it's going to give us the inflation freakout at the top. I predicted the CPI inflation would begin to tick back up. We have now seen that. All worried about it? Gee, we see the market shrugging off the Fed. And it's showing that the Fed is concerned about inflation. And then the market shrugging off the president. Yes, the tariff sheriff is back with more new tariffs. Trump suggests 25% tariffs on autos, pharma, semiconductors. Could go even higher. The market shrugged this off. Again, believe me, we're going towards an inflation freakout. Be blamed on tariffs. And again, I don't like tariffs. I don't like Trump's tariffs. I don't like Europe's tariffs. I don't like anybody's tariffs. I understand he's using it as a bargaining chip. See how all this ends out. Even if the United States is successful in leveling the playing field, and maybe we see a lot of tariffs end up going away, possibly. He is trying to tell us we're going to have a trade war. Maybe that's just not the case. But again, regardless of whether it's true or not, or whether it happens or not, there's still going to be an inflation freakout. Be blamed on the tariffs. I have to understand what's going on here. But again, the market's shrugging off the president's new suggestion about more tariffs. Quickly, just looking at the confirmations, here's the December peak right here. We tried to confirm above that at the January high, and we pulled back and we got our back test. We didn't confirm it. Okay, we got a close above it, but we did not confirm and get a follow through there. Okay, we tried it again here, it failed. We tried it again here, and it failed. And you kept getting reversals at that December peak area. And when we closed above it at the January high surrounding Inauguration Day, the continuation of the election rally from back over here, the move ended up failing. Let me just zoom in here a little bit so you can see that it failed. Now we're confirming getting this solid push above the December high right here. We got a push above that December high, and now we're confirming that yesterday. And then the January high over here, which we pulled back on, we got the confirmation of that above that by just 1 point yesterday. So I don't know if that was a decisive enough close above it. Maybe today is, and you're getting a real confirmation of that. Because we did close 1 point above the previous peak there, today is the confirmation bar of that close yesterday, even though it was just 1 point, 61.29. The peak over here was 61.28. So again, if we do pull back, I'll be watching the trend line here, but beautiful back test off of the bull flag as I predicted would happen, and then we got that higher low here with the VWAP support and our 200 period, and we bounced off the 50 period in the daily time frame. Confirmation, the push above the January peak now, confirmation, a push above the December peak, so we are going higher. Remain bullish. Push higher, we are getting divergences that are forming, and maybe they're not done yet. I talked about that yesterday. We got that hanging man candlestick. I told you it might be a bottoming tail. End up just getting a mild pullback. But listen, well, we may get a short-term pullback if these divergences start to play out. We've got forming on the MACD and the RSI there on the 60-minute chart. We've got it here in the 15-minute chart. Again, it is likely just going to be a pullback. We're going higher. Again, I talked about this little divergence that's developing here on the RSI and down here on the MACD. You can see it a little bit better on the 30-minute chart and the 15-minute chart I just showed you. Here it is on the 30-minute chart up close and personal, so you can see what I'm talking about. We've got this divergence developing. It may not be done yet, but it is under construction, and we'll probably see some kind of pullback. But again, short-term price fluctuations could allow a pullback, but the main movement is higher. I continue to be bullish. Again, I think that we are headed up to this upper boundary here on the daily chart, the rising wedge. Talked about this at great length and detail. Again, told you over here, I thought we were bouncing off the trend line from the 2023 low, which is this trend line right here, which we did in our 100 period moving average. Told you the head and shoulders pattern was a total fake, and that we had minor wave 4 completing, and we were going into minor wave 5. And I predicted the rally, the bottom. We got the first subwave here, the second subwave, predicted that we would pull back. We did. Now we're getting a lot of choppiness as we're likely in subwave 3, have begun subwave 3 of the fifth minor wave here. And I think we rally into late March or early April. Again, they're talking about, going into April 1st or so. That was a date given. That may change. Could see the beginning of the reciprocal tariffs at that time. The beginning, not all of them may be implemented at the same time. Next few weeks, we're going to be getting the hopes of extension of the 2017 tax cuts. And again, this doesn't include new tax cuts, those middle class tax cuts, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and no tax on Social Security come later in the year, likely end up giving us a counter trend on hopes of that after we get a dramatic sell-off. But this is what I think is happening. And again, so far it's playing out beautifully. We're likely going to see a major top in the stock market when we come up to this trend line, and we may slam into it a couple of times, going into late March or on into early April. It's a rising wedge going into the larger channel in the daily time frame. This is where I think we are headed. And again, maybe on into late March or on into early April, but that's where I think we're headed. Here it is in the weekly time frame. Same thing, the rising wedge going into the channel. So don't get distracted by short-term price fluctuations, even though I predicted the pullback for subwave 2 and that second pullback to go back and test that low. It's just a bunch of choppiness as we're headed towards this resistance area up in here. And again, we may get another pullback. Some of the negative divergences that are forming on the intraday charts. But again, I believe we'll end up going higher, likely going into late March or early April to complete the blow-off top before getting the inflation freak out that I've been warning. I think that's coming.